Welcome to the Adventure Photo Show. My name is Steve Reichert. I'm an adventure photographer and filmmaker, and this channel is all about encouraging you to tell your story with a camera and have fun doing it. And I love being outside, and having a camera makes those experiences that much better. And this last week or so, I have had the opportunity to play with a couple of different cameras, and specifically the camera that is kind of new to me. It's been an interesting opportunity, I guess, because most of the time when I have cameras that I'm looking at, that I'm using or reviewing, I feel like there's a little bit more pressure involved with the idea of having to make comparisons and make notes on a camera, because usually I'm doing that with a camera that I bought, and I'm doing that with prospective buyers in mind. And this last week or so, I've been shooting with a camera which is not my own. I did not buy it. I didn't steal it either, technically. But Matt from Washington sent this Olympus EM10 Mark II to me, and so I've kind of taken a little bit of a break from testing my Fuji gear, which I've been working on the X-E3, and I have a couple more X-E3 videos that I'm looking forward to putting out there, kind of going into the video side of the X-E3, and also talking a little bit about the pancake lenses. Sorry, lost my train of thought there for a second, because I made a handful of videos already on the X-E3, and I'm kind of ready to move past that point where, like, I already know that the X-E3 is the camera that I'm going to keep, that I'm going to move forward with. That's like going to be my 5-year camera, for a number of different reasons, which, you know, maybe we'll talk about a little bit later in the live stream tonight. But just when I thought I was like really solidly settled, you know, I got this camera, and this is the EM10 Mark II. It's like a 2.5-year-old camera, and it's going for around $300 on eBay. So in some ways it's a pretty unfair comparison, because it doesn't have like 4K, and the files are smaller, and doesn't have nearly as big of a sensor as the Fuji X-E3. And so, you know, in my mind, what I've been really trying to do is just let go of the idea of making a comparison between cameras, and rather just to say, can I have fun with this camera? Can I take good pictures that I'm happy with? And am I hitting more than I'm missing when I'm using a camera? And it is different. It's very interesting for me, because usually I have a lot more wrapped up in the comparative process, and since this is an older camera too, you know, the review concept, I feel a little bit more liberty, a little bit more freedom to just kind of say, you know, I'm going to focus on the things that make sense to me and the things that I enjoy, rather than try to pick it all apart and be super analytical about it. And that's been a very different thing, a different way for me to approach a camera. You know, usually it has a lot more pressure on it, because I don't want to give people bad information and have people make decisions that they're not happy with or whatnot. And so usually I feel obligated to be a little bit more critical of a camera. And while, you know, trying to compare the Olympus with the Fuji is something that, if you're going to compare them like outright on a sheet of paper, certainly the Fuji would win hands down. And you know, to a certain extent, I guess if you were really on a budget, good evening, King Uzi. Good to see you here, sir. And I saw Rika, the hopeful volunteerist, here as well. You know, on paper, the X-E3 certainly is more feature rich, but in terms of dollars and economy, you know, the Olympus camera for $350 is just incredibly versatile in what it can do. And I'm not going to attempt to give my full review on this camera, on the Olympus EM10 Mark II, in this sitting here live. I actually just wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the freedom that I've felt with this camera over the weekend that I've been shooting with it, just to kind of not compare it to something else. And I think that's really hard to do, because a lot of times when we review cameras and when we're talking about gear, we tend to always have something that we're comparing it to. And when you're comparing one thing to another, in a lot of cases, you're going to get a false dichotomy, I guess you could say, about like which camera is actually better. Good evening, Sven, all the way from Cologne. Good to have you here. We are truly an international show here. Glad you could join us. So I won't pretend that there aren't things that, I definitely missed when I was shooting the Olympus, because it's slower, and it's a little bit the handling is a little bit suboptimal, at least to what I'm used to. But that's a big part of it, is that so much of what makes a camera better or worse is what we're used to. And at the end of the day, I guess the thing that I came away with that really impressed me, that stood out to me, was the fact that there were things about the Olympus that, when I just kind of said, all right, I'm going to go out with this camera, I'm going to shoot with my daughter, we're going to run around, we're going to have some fun, we're going to do some videos, do some stills, can I make some photos that I'm going to be happy with? And yes, and it's so hard to put that analytical component out of mind for a time and just say, all right, like, what's the important thing? What is it that I'm trying to do? Am I trying to, pixel peep? Am I trying to dig into something where I want a theoretical level of quality that doesn't really offer me anything practically speaking? Or am I just going out trying to make good pictures and have a good time? And what I found is that, I guess not surprisingly, the Olympus, with its smaller, I believe it's a 12 megapixel sensor, with its, definitely less preferable from my perspective. I like the ergonomics and the handling of the Fuji camera a lot better. But there were some other things, about this camera that really stood out, that were beautiful, like the viewfinder on it. The EVF is vastly superior to that of the X-E3. But from a technical standpoint, just about everything else, on paper, the Fuji would win. But I think about this a lot because, a lot of times I, give advice to people about what cameras I would suggest that they look into. And I guess in a lot of ways I didn't find anything here that surprised me, because I expected to look at this, review it, and to be really happy. I felt like the image quality in this camera was comparable to that I experienced with the Fuji X Pro 1. Where if you have a good lens on it and you're in good light, you can take really, really great images. And, once you start to move out of those optimal conditions, where you need either more light or more speed, in terms of the action that's going on, then the camera's going to struggle a little bit. So that isn't something that I was surprised to encounter. But the I guess the thing that comes to mind once again is just that it really is possible, and even better in a lot of cases, for somebody to use an older camera, because I think that there's, under no circumstances, or under, I shouldn't say no circumstances, under very few circumstances, are you really going to be drastically limited by the shortcomings or the unfair comparison, that exists between an older camera and a newer camera. And sometimes it's nice for me to confirm that, because I tell that to people a lot of the time, and then I also don't follow that myself, because I understand the allure of newer, faster, so-called better gear, because you just want to see if it's going to make everything better. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with really just settling in on a piece of equipment that you have, and taking the time to really get to know it, so that you can work with that piece of gear without it getting in your way, and vice versa. And I think that's a bigger part of what makes a camera effective, rather than just the straight out feature set. And certainly, the features that are on the Olympus, I have to say that, the flip screen, the EVF, the touch screen, are really, really fantastic, including a lot of the different things that the camera can do in terms of the processing, just internally. Very, very impressive. Now, again, I look at this and I say, yeah, but the image quality on the Fuji, it is a little bit better. It's definitely better when you get into Lightroom and you start poking around in the up close in the files. You can definitely see the advantage that the Fuji has, no question. And the speed of the autofocus, for example, is another thing that you can definitely see that as well. But at the end of the day, for $300 versus you know, and the camera body here, this is $800 camera body, $900 camera body, so $600 worth of difference. If I'm talking to somebody to whom $600 is a pretty significant amount of money in the near term, I would say, you know, don't even think about getting a more expensive camera, because this is, you know, this does like so much. I mean, it does so much. And yeah, there's always going to be things that you bump up against that you're like, oh man, I wish it kind of was a little bit more this or a little bit more that. Like, I will say, and I'll be perfectly candid about this, that if the handling on this, if like the ergonomics and the layout on this was more similar to the Fuji, whereas the Fuji has, you know, your shutter speed and your aperture, they're all controlled here, you know, on the lens and on the body. There's really just like two dials plus ISO that you ever need to handle, and you can manually adjust all of those. You don't have to dive into any menus, you don't have to touch any screens. It's very, very tactical, and I like that. If this camera, with the smaller sensor and all of the other things that everybody love, you know, that all of us Fuji users love to hate about the, you know, love to hate about the smaller sensors on the Micro Four Thirds. If it had the same level of like tactile control, I would be really, really tempted to get this, just because of the fact that, like, in terms of performance and the, yeah, it's exactly right, King Yuzi, the law of diminishing returns, that, like, you know, up to a certain point, your dollars that you put out get you more, and then beyond that point, you just start to pay a lot more money for a lot less extra benefit. And that's not to bag on the Fuji cameras at all, but the thing that really makes the big difference with this is that this is really a double threat in terms of video and stills. And, you know, I'm going to make a video hopefully this week, kind of digging into the video side and the, just kind of my experience shooting with it. Nothing like super detailed and in depth on a technical level, but just to say, you know, here's what it's like shooting video, here's what it's like with the stills. It's got the in-body image stabilization, the image quality is really good. It's just the one thing to me that stands in the way is that the Fuji, I want to change shutter speed and exposure. It's all on the outside of the camera like a film camera. It's very, very simple. The Olympus has incredibly powerful modifications that you can make. I mean, you can modify and sub-modify like everything that this camera can do. The problem is that in order to just kind of get it to work the way that you want, you have to modify and sub-modify everything. You have to like dig deep and go really into depth, much more so than I would necessarily want to do. And it's ironic that for a camera that's aimed at sort of, you know, less than like prosumer level camera, where you're assuming that the person is going to be less advanced and possibly less motivated, that they would require, it's almost like you put so much into the camera that it can do, which is very advanced, and is like, you know, buy this camera because it's so awesome and it has all these features. But the catch is that to take advantage of these features adequately, you really have to put the time in to learn how to use the camera, which requires as much effort, or if not more in some cases, than it would to actually just learn how to shoot in RAW and do everything manually and do things, you know, the way that, you know, so-called professionals would be more likely to do. So I found that kind of a little bit humorous with the amount that this does in camera, because this can do, you know, like composite shooting in camera, where you can make like star wheel images, where it'll take a picture every, you know, at an interval, and then it will overlay all those photos together, which is something that typically I would use a program like StarStax to do that on the computer, and to, you know, create a composite image that shows the stars wheeling or streaking through the sky in the night, which is a great image. You know, like those kind of things are really neat. But, you know, this as a prosumer camera does that in camera, but I would argue that it's just as complicated to do that in camera with something like this as it would be to just do it kind of the old-fashioned way. So in one sense, it's very admirable that they cram this level of like technological capacity into a camera that's this cheap and that's this old. That's the other thing that's really exciting about it, is that, like, you know, you can get a camera that's this old and, you know, considered to be so far beyond the curve, or below the curve, I should say, you know. and still get so much that, you know, is still not like, I can't do that with, you know, any kind of composite shooting. I mean, I can do multiple exposure in the Fuji cameras, but they don't have any of that other stuff. So anyways, it's been fun testing out the Olympus and playing with it, and I'm looking forward to doing a more detailed video on that for you guys. But just it's nice to reaffirm and reassert the idea that if you have a camera and you take it out there with the goal of having fun, and you really focus on light and composition, that, you know, anything pretty much within the last, you know, 3-4 years, you can get at a really good bargain value dollar wise, not break the bank, and still be able to do really, really well with it. And I think that that is a message that is not conveyed adequately enough to people who are just starting out. Because if there's one thing that I think that most people get screwed up with when they're starting out, is that there's always that perception of needing more, better, or different gear that is going to somehow improve the photos that you take. And you know, I went down that path as I went into detail in my last live stream, and I'm not sorry that I got a chance to play with some really sweet cameras. You know, the X-T2 is a really rad camera, and the GH5 is a really amazing camera, and I'm glad that I have the GH5, and I'm glad that I, you know, traded down to the X-E3. But it's also kind of given me this, you know, it's given me the incentive to draw that hard line in the sand and say, okay, like, I'm just not gonna, I cannot buy any more camera gear because it's just not a good idea. And starting to take, you know, it's kind of reached a point where it's the negative blowback in my life, and so that 5-year camera, I think, is the way that I'm choosing to look at this stuff. And yeah, I don't know, interesting to have that opportunity. You know, I debated whether or not I wanted to title this live stream something about switching to Olympus, and see if I could get you know, some hate comments and some trolls to check in. But I decided not to go that direction ultimately, because you know, I do like the Fuji. At the end of the day, I like the way that it handles. I like the features that it has. I like that it has, you know, the bigger images, or the larger size images, and slightly better image quality. Those are things that, you know, for whatever reason, once you have them and you get used to them, that feels familiar. And I think the familiarity is really the bigger factor that I enjoy more so than anything else. Is just having that thing that's like, this feels comfortable to me. And so, you know, I think that that's really the bigger issue, is what camera is the one that you like enough, for whatever reasons, to get comfortable with, to the point where it feels good to you. And then when it feels good to you, you're going to make better images with it than even if you have a better featured camera that you're not comfortable with. And so, you know, in most cases, again, it's not you know, it's not 100% on that. King Yuzi asks if the Fuji have APS-C sensors. Yes, the Fuji do have APS-C sensors. The Olympus has a slightly smaller sensor, which is the Micro Four Thirds. And in terms of the image quality, I know that, so image quality is a funny thing, and I'm glad you asked that question. And I don't know whether you did it just because you sensed that I was running out of steam and you threw me a lifeline, but this is actually one of my favorite things to talk about in reference to, because image quality is something that people always bring up when it's like, oh, the image quality sucks. And I don't think you can realistically talk about image quality without talking about the image medium that you're looking at the image in. Like, where is it that you're planning to see these images? What are they going to be put on? How are they going to be viewed? Because I would say that, you know, there is a difference in image quality, but I would say that the practical, so there's a theoretical difference in image quality, and there's practical. So the theoretical difference is that, you know, when you zoom in to 100%, you can see a difference in some of the shots on a Micro Four Thirds versus APS-C. When you look at it on a smartphone, when you look at it on a tablet, even on a computer, when you just look at the final image, it looks good or it doesn't. And it looks good or it doesn't based on the lighting and the composition and the editing, not based on the idea that, like, you can see an inherent quality difference in the file itself in most cases. Now, that's the caveat there, is that there is some inherent practical difference when you're shooting low light. And I have not, the Olympus EM10 Mark II has does have in-body image stabilization, and I played with that a little bit, which certainly helps. Definitely for video, I felt like the in-body image stabilization was really, really good. They definitely brought something very useful to the table. But in terms of the image quality, and I've had this conversation again as well with like the GH5, because I feel like the images that come out of the Olympus EM10 Mark II are very comparable. In fact, almost the same to my eye as those that come out of the GH5. And I think the GH5 is really good. I mean, I think the GH5, their images, the raw images on the Panasonic GH5, again, another Micro Four Thirds sensor, but the GH5, I would say their images are slightly more robust in terms of what they can handle in post-processing before they start to fall apart. But yeah, so image quality is something that varies, because like if you're looking for a true film look, and like true film look is not necessarily tack sharp from corner to corner. A lot of the film look is the grain and the distortion and all of those, very homespun characteristics that take us back and transport us to another time. That's what the film look is realistically, and like I feel like the Micro Four Thirds actually kind of give you that a little bit more accurately. Like shooting Micro Four Thirds with like 400, 500, 800 ISO gives you really nice fine grain, not too much, not too little, but there's enough there that you can actually see it. And if you kind of zoom into 100%, you're not going to see the the grain of dust on the tip of the eyelash necessarily, like you might on the APS-C image. And that's a really nice thing to have too. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like there's sometimes when I like the fact that I can crop in like majorly on one of my images that I take with the Fuji X-E3, and that there's just a huge amount of detail that can still be had even at like 100% crop, which is just kind of like, wow, I can't believe that they can do that. So that's really impressive too. But you know it's not bad on the Micro Four Thirds. It's not bad. It's just a little bit different, and it depends on kind of what you're used to and what you're looking for. So, and again, I know that's a very personal, interpretive kind of way to determine it or to describe it. And again, a lot of it comes down to like how close are you going to view this stuff. And as a person who is editing your photos, the problem is I think that as photographers, we make our assessments about image quality as we are editing the photos. We do this in Lightroom, where we're generally looking at a lower quality, sort of what's the term that we use, like a proxy version that like we would use in video, where we're using lower quality, faster editing, and then the actual file that we output is of higher quality, but we're not punching into that at 100%. Now, yes, you can tune and fine tune and change the resolution that your sample images, or that your working images in Lightroom, what they're showing you, but I know that that's where I do the majority of my pixel peeping, is there. And when I actually put those photos to print, I feel like, I can't feel any, any difference. I don't feel like there's any real measurable difference there where I feel shortchanged. Maybe if I was shooting like billboards or something, it might be. King Uzi says, I'm wondering because the sensor in my Canon 600D is from 2011 and I'm going to the Lumix G85. That's an interesting comparison. I look forward to hearing from you what you think about that. I think that, in my experience, the older full frame sensors, like for example, I had a Nikon 600, D600 full frame sensor that I bought in 2012, and I would say that the raw files out of that are about the same, as robust as and when I say robust, I mean that you can subject them to like smashing and bashing and hashing and, work in post-processing before they start to show signs and kind of look ugly, or like, they have a lot of flexibility. They're durable. You can edit them fairly decently before they start to fall apart. And I would say that the D600 full frame Nikon from 2012 is about the same, maybe even a little bit less lower quality than the Fuji X-E3, and they're the same size files, both 24 megapixel files. And honestly, like, I always felt really happy with what I got out of the D600. It was just that camera was beastly. It was enormous. That's the camera that I carried back into the Wind River range. So if you've watched the Wind River project, the documentary film, all the time lapses in that film I shot. My partner in the project, Blake, he shot much of the climbing footage that was actually done on the route. I shot some of the stuff from base camp, and then I shot time-lapse stuff, and I shot some other, B-roll. So we kind of split the video load, but I shot all the time-lapse, which a lot of it was nighttime time-lapse, so star lapses. I shot that with the Nikon D600. And carrying that thing back there was very, very arduous. 16 miles off the, 16 miles backpacking to get into the backcountry there with that, and I can tell you I felt every ounce of it. So being able to have a much lighter and smaller camera that would do that would be awesome. So I guess hey Andrew, good to see you here. Greetings to you from New York. Good to have you here from Bangkok. That's we are truly international here. This is pretty sweet. Thank you, because I know the time difference as well, I'm getting ready to go to bed. Maybe I don't know, maybe you're stealing time from your boss at work and you're just killing some time with us here, but I appreciate it nonetheless. So I think a lot of it comes down to like where you're going to be using the camera and where you're going to be shooting with it. I don't think that with the appropriate glass and with the appropriate lighting, I don't think there's too much that you're going to find that you can't do or that doesn't make pretty comparable results with the G85. That's my take. Now again, I would really love to hear from you specifically if how you feel about that, because I'm not really familiar with the performance of the Canon sensors and like that whole system. I can only my best that I can do is compare Nikon, and even that it's not even like a straight across. I haven't done like a one-to-one test with Nikon versus Fuji. I just know that when I go out to shoot, I'm happy with what I bring back with the Fujis, and that the amount of noise is pretty negligible. The one thing I haven't had a chance to do a lot of with the Fuji is to shoot like star lapse stuff. So that's one type of night or low light image that is a particularly challenging test for a camera, because there are certain parts of the image that you really need the highlights to stand out, and you want a certain amount of the shadows to come up but not so much, and you don't want you'd have to balance some competing light values in those types of images, and oftentimes that requires that you push the image a little bit more than you would want to in certain parts of the image anyway. So if you do some side-by-side comparisons with the same photos and the same settings between those two sensors, it would be really cool to see how that works. But yeah, I think the whole debate about image quality is really interesting, because I think so much of that just comes down to a good looking image is going to look good if you're viewing it in the appropriate context. And some images are not meant to be seen at 100% this close to your face. Some are meant to be seen from a little further away. That's why things are galleries have different things laid out differently. It's based on the way that the distance, the appropriate viewing distance that you're supposed to look at stuff from. And so I think that I guess my point is that you can get overly caught up or hung up in trying to criticize, and this is something that I do because of the fact that I review cameras. This is a natural tendency to get caught up in criticizing a camera, which at the end of the day, like, every camera has something that you can criticize, right? Like, if you buy a Hasselblad, the image quality may be harder to criticize, but then it's like the image quality for that dollar, like, there's a criticism there. So there's always something that you can pick into, and I think that there's something to be said for learning to enjoy and appreciate. And that's not what I necessarily want. That's not my goal when I'm making reviews, because as a reviewer, when I'm in that wearing that reviewer hat, my goal is not to say here's what I like about this camera as much as it is to say if you can't deal with this, don't buy this camera. That's usually what I'm doing when I'm reviewing, because it's more important to me that I keep people from making knee-jerk decisions and buying a camera that they hate, rather than having them wait an extra 3 months before they're sure that that's the camera that they want. I'd rather, help people be sure before they buy. Oh yeah, you're gonna love the gas addiction, and I guarantee you that the problem is that when you get the one, the next one is gonna come really. It's like serial killing, or at least what they say about it. Like the first one is hard, but then after that it just gets easier, and you're gonna find that all of a sudden these lenses, it's gonna be like, well, I got this camera, I need to get that lens so that I make this transition to the different camera, so that I make that work. Like obviously I have to have that lens. Like why wouldn't I? And then before you know it, it's like yeah, it's a lot of fun in its own way until collection agencies come looking for you. Which I'm kind of kidding about that. Like I haven't had collection agencies looking for me, but I reached a point in my life where I'm just like, okay, I'm just sick of being broke, so I'm just not going to buy anything anymore. Andrew Criswell asks if I've ever tried ISO bracketing on my Fuji. I have not done that. I have not done that yet. And actually, I guess I should be ashamed to say this, but I'm going to say it anyways, but I'm not exactly sure what ISO bracketing is. I think that it is taking it maybe some sort of composite shooting mode where I know, like for example, I know if you do in Lightroom, where you shoot a series of high ISO images, then it will like merge them to basically noise cancellation. So wherever there's noise or lack of information in one image, then it just kind of takes the maximum amount of information or image quality in all the images and kind of composites that into one. Now, is that what the ISO bracketing is, or am I misunderstanding that? Because if I'm understanding that correctly, that's a pretty cool feature, but something that I haven't yet been disposed to trying, because most of what I've been doing, I've been happy with what I've been getting, out of the camera as is. But and also for me too, this is another thing, is that I don't really. There are a lot of features in a lot of cameras that I just don't use, and I can't see myself ever using. Like I'm not really interested in, at this point, I'm not really interested in any sort of, like HDR bracketing modes, generally speaking. I mean, I can conceive of circumstances where that would be useful, but it's hard for me to test things, and it doesn't usually occur to me to test things if it's not something that I would use. And I'm kind of more meat and potatoes stuff. In the way that I use a camera, I'm certainly not the most refined photographer out there. That's one of the reasons why when I reviewed the X100F, I got a lot of people giving me grief because I didn't go into depth on the leaf shutter and how wonderful the leaf shutter is. Which, if you shoot with a flash, I'm pretty sure that the leaf shutter on the X100F would be considered like a boon. It would just be amazing. And actually reading the difference in the sync speeds, I think that could be a great thing. But if you don't shoot flash, it's kind of like but yeah. So I'm happy to admit my ignorance there. Good evening, Peter Kent. Okay, so Andrew says it takes one photo and processes it internally, plus minus one exposure value. JPEG only, 3 photos are produced. Interesting. So, I mean, based on that description, I'm not really sure what the benefit of that is, unless it was so that you could layer them over and kind of try to do something different in post later. And I'm just like, I guess I don't get it. I'm not sure what I guess like if you're taking a photo and you wanted to see if, just to be able to have a sample of images to select from and say which one kind of works better. But I'd rather shoot raw and just edit it that way myself and kind of play with it in post and add, because you can add, a couple of stops with exposure value in post very easily in almost all the shots without losing anything. for all practical purposes. So I would just rather do it that way personally. And you know, I'm a little bit lazy, but to my needs, that's kind of the way I look at it. We were talking about the ISO bracketing, Peter. That's not something that I have used extensively, so that's something that could be, you know, maybe someone else could chime in on that a little bit, because I don't have a lot of purposeful use for that. So Andrew, you say you use it for fast night street photography in black and white. Do you just do that so that you can automatically get more selection when you're kind of going through your images? Is that the idea, or does it actually enhance the image quality through some sort of sampling witchcraft or magic? That's the thing, I guess, that I'm trying to gather from the function of it. And to answer your question, King Yuzi, about the built-in multiple exposures, the Fuji cameras all have the multiple exposures built in, and I think that, like, some of the others, it wouldn't surprise me if Olympus has that as well, because Olympus, like, their cameras, they have a lot of different things that the cameras can do. They have like 30 special modes, like they have. And when I do the video, I'm going to kind of go through them and talk about them a little bit. But like, when you read the manual, like, that's one camera, that the Olympus, and this is, you know, 3.5-year-old camera. You read the manual, and like, you really have to read the manual, because it's filled with a lot of information, because the camera does so much stuff and the menu is so bloody deep. But yeah, the Fuji has double exposure, JPEG only, I believe, at this point, and the double exposure is real sweet. I really like using that. There's some really cool stuff that you can, some cool effects that you can achieve with that in the camera. Don't mind me. I'm a little coming down with something, which is bound to happen. Yeah. King Yuzi asks if shooting raw might be better for night street photography. So I can only say what I think and what I've used, because I can't really make a comparison between the two. I just like shooting raw, and so for me, shooting raw is what I'm going to do. Because there may be advantages to doing a lot of different things, but part of the way that I shoot is, and I think this is, and this is maybe sort of a cop-out, but this is honestly how I feel, is that, like, you have to know, or ideally you know the way that you shoot, and then you make everything based on, like, okay, do I actually care about shooting that way or not? And for me, regardless of what the fancy things are, like even with the Olympus, for example, the live composite, you know, like the star stacking in camera that the Olympus does. Good evening, Daniel. Good to see you here. You know, that does in camera. It's super impressive, but I kind of don't care about that. You know, I'd like to try it once just to see what it does, because I think it's a cool thing that I've never done in camera before. But not really something where I'm like, man, I'm going to definitely use that. Probably not, because it's just not the way that, just not the way that I shoot. So I think that it probably is comparable, but to me, you got to go with whatever you like doing better. So Andrew says, I'm shooting manual exposure, usually at 1/25 or 250, and adjust the aperture manually. The bracketed ISO exposure, or the ISO, assures a greater chance of right exposure without much need for post. And I think that that's probably the central difference in those two approaches, is that, like, I like editing, and I'm like, when I take my photos, I'm excited to go back and edit them. Like, that's the second half of it to me. Like, it doesn't feel complete. I want to go in there and play with the images and tinker around with them. And I get that that is not the case for everybody. I don't know why. I mean, you know, I love editing. I think it's super fun, but there's the other thing about that too that I like, is that when you're shooting with the intention, you're shooting raw with the intention of editing, at least for me, it helps me to be a little bit more intentional about what I actually pull the trigger on, rather than, you know, spraying out a myriad of images excuse me, myriad of images, and then going back and having to, because I know that I'm going to have to edit whatever I'm going to edit. So when I'm looking at a picture, a lot of times I'm trying to be very critical and selective before I even pull the trigger on it and say, is this going to be worth my time? Am I really going to feel like editing it, so that I can spend more time looking for the shots where I'm like, hell yes, I can't wait to get this back in the computer so I can edit this and see what this looks like. And so that's just a difference in strategy and approach. And I don't think mine is better, but I know which one is better for me personally, because that's just what I like. Um, you know, let's see. Uh, Peter Kent says, I know HDR photographers like Trey Ratcliffe use exposure bracketing, then tone maps them in post. That is definitely one of my weaker areas, any kind of HDR bracketing, tone mapping. Like, once it gets beyond fairly minimal adjustments, like, honestly, I'm somewhere between intimidated and not as interested. Because I like editing, but I like editing at a level where I can kind of go through and do it fairly quickly. Like, there are some people, like I have a friend who shoots, he does large, like, composite images, very, very large, and makes, like wall hangings, like massive wall hangings for super rich people who buy them, and support his business. Which is awesome. But like, he will spend days and days editing a single image, and while I do have the patience to shoot in RAW and edit my photos, I don't want to spend all day on one image. I want to be able to spend like maybe an hour and a half on 15 to 20 images. And so there's, like, again, that balance point based on what I'm comfortable with and what I want to do. But there's some really, really amazing things that you see people who have that level of expertise in editing, and I would call myself slightly more advanced than a hack in editing. Like, I know a couple of little tricks to kind of draw the viewer's eye a certain direction, or to achieve certain little effects. But I don't really look at myself as being much more than just a practiced amateur with most of that stuff. So when you're talking about getting really serious in terms like tone mapping and stuff, I kind of I kind of withdraw when I hear that. Sven says, I do not know Olympus so well, but I just looked at the price and size of the current cameras, models, lenses from Olympus. Like me, it seems very similar to Fuji. I wonder why one would decide then for a smaller sensor, which would mean lower image quality. Does Olympus have a much better autofocus compared to Fuji? So, good questions. I think there's a few different reasons why people might do that. I know for me, one of the things that has tempted me, and still does, honestly, like, if they had an external aperture on the camera, an external shutter speed, this Olympus, the controls feel very, very similar to a DSLR. The X-E3 feel much more similar to a film camera, right? Like, and this actually is a vintage lens, a Takumar Super Tac lens that I have on here right now. Aperture on the lens, shutter speed on the camera, ISO is the only thing, and you're just hitting a button to get to the ISO. That very analog feeling type of control, if the Olympus or even the Panasonic, if they made a camera that operated like that, I hate to disappoint potentially all the people that are gonna, personally hate me as a person, like, just detest my existence for saying this, but I have to be honest, I would go to Micro Four Thirds in a heartbeat. And here's why. Being able to have one system for video and stills that share lenses would be amazing. One of the things I love about the Fuji cameras is I love their lenses. Their lenses are beautiful. The problem is, and one of the reasons why I got the X-T2 and I was lambasted and criticized in a lot of my, by people who just, brand bigots, when I brought this up, is like, I really wanted to make the Fuji work, the X-T2 work as a video camera, because I wanted to have one system, and I could even handle having two different bodies that share the same lenses, but I wanted to have basically like one system that used the same lenses, so that you're not having to buy one for video, one for photos. that's definitely part of my thought process in terms of switching to Micro Four Thirds. Now, in terms of the smaller image or smaller sensor and the lesser image quality, um, I think that there is a small number of situations where that is absolutely true. In other words, where that is a fixed variable, or that's a fixed value, right? Where there, I think in the majority of situations, and I shot a video where I compared the X-T2 by Fuji against the GH5 by Panasonic. GH5 is Micro Four Thirds, and X-T2 obviously APS-C, and in situations that were anything that I could shoot handheld, um, I found the results to be comparable. I could make the results comparable, with the exception of when you're getting into lower light, as long as the subject was standing still enough. So, like lower light, when you have to bump up the ISO, keep the shutter pretty fast to freeze motion, you're going to have an advantage there with the Fuji that the smaller sensor can't match. So you're shooting little kids at dusk, you're going to have an advantage with a camera that can handle higher ISO and has room for more editing in post. In pretty much any other situation, including like still life or slower or less motion shots in low light, if you can shoot it handheld with the in-body image stabilization that the Olympus and the Panasonic GH5 has, you can make comparable images to the Fuji. Like if you get in there and you blow it up with the GH5, even when you get in there and blow it up in pixel peep, it's still comparable. With the older Olympus EM 10 Mark II, that one, when you get in there in pixel peep, you can see much more of a difference. But when you're looking at them on a phone, or even just kind of at face value, is again, it's comparable. The image quality is definitely comparable. Like if you showed somebody that picture, they wouldn't be revolted and say, "Oh, that looks terrible. You must have shot that with like a junky camera," or like this camera was shot with a pro camera. This one was shot with like a amateur camera. Which a lot of people like to kind of make that argument about it. But honestly, a smaller sensor is not necessarily the end of the world. There are situations in which I like having a smaller sensor, because if you want to do anything with video, if you want to have any kind of stabilization involved, the smaller sensor gives you a lot more flexibility. That's the reason why Panasonic has a camera like the GH5 that can shoot awesome stills with a Micro Four Thirds sensor, and has the best, I believe, as far as I have heard and that I know of, the best in-body image stabilization, because the sensor is small enough that there's, from an engineering standpoint, which again, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to pretend to speak to all of that, but it gives them the ability to do a lot of great things because of the fact that it has a smaller sensor. And the other part of that too, smaller sensor means smaller lenses, smaller glass. And at this point, like, the difference between a Micro Four Thirds, like Micro Four Thirds and APS-C, is a smaller difference than the difference between APS-C and full frame, right? So like there's a pretty, if you're talking about the difference between full frame and Micro Four Thirds, in some cases you're gonna, and again, not necessarily in all cases, like a bright day, you have good light and everything, and you're not looking for, you don't need like completely, what's the word that I'm looking for, completely obscuring depth of field bokeh, but you want to be able to have, if you don't need like 100% blurred out bokeh and you have good light, you can shoot comparable images on Micro Four Thirds and a full frame camera, like it's not, and there are, so it's hard to say, but I feel like a lot of it is situational. I always kind of reject the hypothesis or the statement that you are going to get worse image quality because you have a smaller sensor. I don't believe that is true. I've seen enough images and even heard arguments from professional photographers who shoot like birds. There's one photographer particularly, I listen to his podcast, Scott Bourne, on the Photo Focus network, and the guy that his like partner in the show is he shoots, I think, Fuji X-T2, and so his partner shoots X-T2 and he shoots Olympus. He's a bird photographer, and he's always talking about how he appreciates the fact that he can get longer. Basically, the crop on the sensor gives him more reach with the same amount of glass, basically. So he's carrying less, being able to reach further, and because it has a slightly, you know, less bokeh on the shots, he's not like missing shots nearly as much, and it still gives enough bokeh to where it looks good. And but he doesn't have to like stop the lens down to achieve that deeper depth of field. He can have the lens wide open still to get maximum light in, but not have to get penalized from having too much bokeh. Because despite what some people may think, too much bokeh is a bad thing, because that razor thin depth of field causes you to miss your focus, you know, and it can ruin shots. So again, it's all very relative what is better or worse in terms of image quality. And you know, some of my favorite shots that I've ever taken have been taken on, you know, smaller sensor cameras. Like, for example, you know, I'll take this off the wall here, denuding the wall behind me, but like, you know, this image here was taken with the Sony RX100 Mark II, and you know, looking at it, there's a ton of detail in there. It's a beautiful shot, and it was taken the morning after I spent the night out on an exposed ridge, you know, worrying about getting pummeled to death by like hail and lightning and all that other stuff. So I appreciated that moment when I took that shot. But image quality wise, like, I look at that's as good as any of the things that I've ever taken with, you know, with the X100F, or even with a full frame camera. Like this was, no, that's not, that was with a crop sensor camera as well, the lightning shot. But you know, so the whole idea that smaller sensor equals bad image quality, I reject that, at least in my experience. So again, your mileage may vary, and if you're doing certain types of photography, you know, that could be one's experience, and that's why, you know, I understand that that's why people say that. But the majority, sorry, while I hang this back up here for the, okay, you know, for the majority of people who are looking for different, you know, looking for what most people generically refer to as image quality, you know, the person who's like a very specialized type of portrait photographer, you know, if you need a medium format camera or if you need full frame, you're not asking me. For most people that are asking me about that are people that are like, hey, I saw this really awesome picture on Instagram, I want to be able to take pictures that look like that. You know, so like, yeah, I don't think it's a very complex issue, but there you go. Hey, Tiff, glad you joined us here. And Matt, I've been talking lots of good stuff about your Olympus camera. Hopefully this week I am going to have that video done. I got to shoot a bunch with it, stills and video. This past weekend, I was out with my family and got to do a bunch with it. Made some really cool images that I was really happy with. And long story short, I'm torn because I love the Olympus and I would love being able to have one system that uses the same lenses for my video and my stills on the GH5 for video, and then on this, you know, smaller camera, walk around camera like this Olympus. But I don't want to start changing cameras around again and going through all that. So I'm going to be sticking with what I got for now and learning to be happy with it. So Peter says sensor size doesn't change image quality, just resolution or pixel size does. A larger sensor has more potential for higher resolution or larger pixels, but the difference between the best smaller sensor cameras and the larger sensor cameras are so close now. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. There's the amount of difference, the amount of absolute difference, you know, is fairly minimal. I think there are some fringe scenarios where you could find one being better than the other, but um, for the most part, I think a lot of it comes down to just what appeals to you and what you like, and what's the most comfortable for your style of shooting. And yeah, so I know what I like, and I like the way that the Fuji cameras handle. That's the thing that I really, that's the thing that I really like. And honestly, Matt, one of the things I also said earlier, and I mean this, is that um, you know, the handling was the biggest drawback for me about this camera. Not the sensor size, not the image quality. I feel like this camera is truly a double threat camera because it can do video really well, and it can do, um, you know, it can do the stills really well. Like I think is really impressive, especially for a camera that's as old as it is. In camera years, like 3.5 years or 2.5 years, whatever. That's an old camera, and super super impressed with it. But it's the handling is the big thing that it comes down to for me. It's like I like a camera that handles with the external controls. I like shutter speed and one wheel, and I like aperture on my lens, and just real simple cut and dried stuff. And so that's kind of why one of the things that I can't give up. But again, that's not because it's better. It's it's more a matter of just that's what I like, and that's what I've grown accustomed to. As far as the menus on the Olympus, I will say that I wouldn't say that the menus are bad. So I would say that Sony menus are bad. So like Sony menus, they have these terms that, it's like they're overly technical and they're not really descriptive of what the functions are. Like when you read through the Sony menus, you're not like, oh, okay, I know what this does. Oh, okay, I know what that does, just by reading through it. The Olympus, it's got like menus. It's just the menu system is very, very deep on the Olympus, which is both frustrating and beneficial. Like it's nice if you want to customize everything all the time, but it can be really frustrating if you just want to do something really quick and fast and you don't want to have to bother around with that too, which is more how I tend to be. But at least the menu system is laid out in a way that's pretty straightforward, and you kind of can read through it and be like, okay, this is fairly simple to know what it does. Panasonic is a little bit more complicated, but it's a fairly similar type of organization. I wouldn't say, though, that it's a bad menu system. It's just very deep. It's very extensive. But when I look at it, I know what I'm looking at. The Sony menu systems, I'm looking at that, scratching my head, saying, like, there's not even like a rhyme or reason to it. It's just like, so that's one, and that's one of the big complaints that I have about the Sony cameras, is I just don't like the menu system. I don't want to have to go through all these like hijinks just to be able to access a couple of things that I need. I want it to be very, very streamlined and very smooth. I don't care, the image quality I can take or leave, but if I'm always missing shots, that's not going to be good. So yeah, I appreciate you sending me appreciate you sending me the camera, because it's nice to have a chance to review something just for fun, and review something and be able to talk more about the things that I liked and not have to worry about like saying, oh, this is exactly how everything works or whatever. Because like I tooled through that menu system a few times. I was like, yeah, there's no way I'm going to be able to do anything even remotely comprehensive on this camera, because it does so much. It's like that's one of the few cameras where you actually need the user manual. Like you need to read the user manual multiple times. It's because it's got a lot going on there, which is great. Like that's not a bad thing necessarily. It's just different. It's different from what I'm used to, because there's like I feel like with most Fuji cameras, I can pick up a Fuji camera, and with the exception of maybe 2 to 5 items, I don't really need to even do much research on it. It's like there's maybe 5% of what the camera can do are things that I have to look deeper into, and then everything else is just like, okay, yeah, I know what this does. It's all fairly self-explanatory. you know. But it's an interesting comparison too, though, and this is part of the reason why I enjoyed doing this review, is because it's interesting to compare the idea of having more stuff in a camera, like whether or not that's better. And I don't really think that one is better or worse. It's just they are just different, and it's really impressive that a camera that's that old, relatively speaking, okay, 2.5 years, and $350 or $300 camera compared to, like, one of the new Fuji cameras, you know that little camera is punching way above its weight, in terms of its feature set. But is that necessarily better or desirable? Because you look at Fuji, they take a lot longer to implement something like, like their menu system, but then they do it in a way that's very minimal, and like the touch system, but they do it in a way that's much more minimal and eliminates buttons and kind of simplifies everything. And, like, it kind of makes me wonder who the people are who design these cameras. If you can envision the people, I think that, like, Fuji has more photographers that are directly involved in the design, who kind of push back against the engineers that are like, yeah, but what if we did this, and we could put this in, and we could put that in. They're like, yeah, you could put that in, but, like, how are you going to implement it in a way that is really going to work well and work with the camera? And so from that standpoint, I really appreciate what Fuji does, because they show a lot of restraint, I think. They show great restraint by not putting stuff in just because they can. Instead, they hold back, and they hold back in order to wait until they can implement it in a way that is more, that builds in well to what they're doing with the camera. Whereas the Olympus, they're kind of like, yeah, well, what if we could do this, yeah, and this, and then we could do that, and we could do that, and it's like, how much can we put in there and make that camera do? Which is also a good thing in a way, because, like, you're giving a huge amount of value to somebody who buys that camera. It's like pretty much anything that they want to do, if they're willing to dig through the menus and read read the user manual, like, they have a very, very, very versatile animal there that they can play with. So I think that's a cool. It's cool to see the different philosophies at work, and the different minds that go into building the cameras, and be able to kind of play off of them both. Mario says, I have the Olympus OMD EM5 Mark II. Which do I have? The menu is complicated on the Olympus. Yes, Mario, I would agree. The menu is complicated, although I don't. It's just, yeah, it's just, there's a lot there, right? I am borrowing the OMD EM10 Mark II. So I'm borrowing this from Matt, who sent it to me, wanted to get my thoughts and hear me rant about it a little bit. And this is a pre-rant. I'm still going to do, like, a proper edited video where I show you the images that I took with this, and also the video that I shot, and kind of give you a little bit of nuts and bolts. But at the end of the day, I was, again, very, very tempted by the Olympus, just because of the fact that, this little camera, I love. There's a lot that I do love about it at the same time, as there are things that feel very unfamiliar that I don't like about it. But it's just very, and the dollar value, I think, is one of the things that I like about it the most. It's like, man, that's a hell of a lot to put into a camera that's going for $350. That's interesting, Andrew, that you say they've improved the menu system on the Mark III for the EM10. And I imagine that's something that they're working on now too, because I think what happens is, a lot of times the feedback maybe doesn't make it all the way up the chain for the first couple of camera bodies, until people are consistently saying, like, come on guys, let's fix this stuff, and you keep consistently getting complaints about it, then they're bound to take it seriously. And my take on the menu system is, it's, I'm less concerned about the menu system, honestly, and I am more concerned with the lack of external controls and knobs and buttons, because the Fuji menus are also kind of, you know, the Fuji's are, their menus could be considered a little bit complicated too. I mean, they're not as deep. There's not as many pages to them, but there's a lot there too. It's just that you don't need to go into the menu. So that's really the way that, you know, that's one of the reasons why I like the Fuji cameras. Is I can make all the adjustments that I need to do. The major stuff I can do it without having to really go into the menu at all. And if there was a workaround for that, you know, on either Panasonic or Olympus, I would be all over that, because being able to have one set of lenses for both stills and videos, that would be amazing, you know. Yeah, assigning the I've looked at some of the button assignments and all of that, and honestly, like if I were on a desert island with you know, if I were on a desert island with only this camera, I might go through that, but I don't know. Like I have a hard enough time, honestly, because the Olympus kind of, it reminds me very much of like a DSLR, the way that it's laid out and the way that the buttons and the wheels kind of work with the shutter speed and I always forget which one is which, and yeah, you know, and I remapped some of the function buttons to where, like the ISO, I put the ISO on the front, like the function 2 button up here. And there's probably a couple more things that I could do, but really it's more like just the shutter speed, and it's shutter speed and aperture. I want those to be on the, you know, I want less buttons. And then the other thing too is things like punching in to use manual focus. I would like to be able to have a button that does the in and out on the Fuji, whereas this one, you know, they really implemented the touch screen technology to a much larger extent, but that also left them without buttons, you know, without real estate to put the buttons where you could use as an alternative. And I don't really I'm not really sold on the touch to go in and out on this. So I mean, again, it's fairly minor stuff, and it's stuff that if I own this camera, I could work around it, and I could learn to get used to it, because you know, it does a lot, and there is a great deal of customization that can occur. The question is, how much time do I have? And I'm not asking you this rhetorically, because I know that you've been very generous with giving me time to learn the camera, but it's how much time can I really realistically spend to learn and dig into a camera. It's kind of like, all right, the test is, if I take 2 weeks, what can I do in 2 weeks with the camera while still having a life, and how much can I get out of it realistically? You know, that's kind of the benchmark for me. Whereas you know, if I own the camera, I think I could probably find a way to do just about anything that I wanted to with it, and if not, I could change it the way, you know, that I want. So yeah, it's been fun though. Jose Angel says, we take the picture, not the camera, so I, as an amateur photographer, do have some responsibility of making the most out of the instrument I have, regardless what kind of camera it is. Just remember that equipment comes last, you come first. And yeah, I can get behind that. I think there's some value to that point. I've definitely said and felt similarly, Jose, at various times. I think that, you know, I don't know if it's as quite that black and white. I think there definitely are some situations where, like, I think it makes a difference to have a camera that you're excited about. You know, if you have a camera that you really like and that you are excited about it, whether it's for placebo reasons or for fully legitimate reasons, you know, I think that that's going to help you shoot more and shoot in a way where you feel more inspired. And so there's a certain extent to which, you know, the camera doesn't matter, but the camera also does matter, you know. And then also too, the part of it is that, you know, what you look for in an image is based on what you have found in previous images. So you cultivate expectations, which again, you know, depending on the level of Zen philosophy that you want to get into in this discussion, we could say that that's a bad thing and that expectations are the, the cause of all human suffering. But I think that a lot of what we're used to seeing and what we expect to see, that dictates how we feel about image quality. Because if somebody shoots with an Olympus, and a Micro Four Thirds sensor, kind of to my earlier point, you can love the image quality you get out of it and never feel like you're lacking anything, I believe. And then on the other hand, then when you move to a different sensor, then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this is different than what I expected to see. What, or vice versa. And then you're going to feel like, oh, well, one is better and one is worse. Well, a lot of it is just that it's different than what you expect to see, because in your mind, a good picture is a good picture coming out of this camera that you're used to using, which is going to look different than, a good picture coming out of another camera, maybe. So it's there's a lot of variance, in there. And I won't say that I've completely given up on all this stuff. I think that the best thing that I can do is really at this point, just try to get my money's worth out of. I'm going to do the 5-year camera thing, and I've been very focused on paying down debt and kind of getting myself out of that debt, and I'm going to be using my cameras to do that. So I'm not gonna run out there and jump ship on the old on Team Fuji. I don't have to bail just yet, but it's nice to know that I could. It's nice to know that I could, and that there are other options, and in another 2 or 3 years, by the time I'll probably be, I expect 2 or 3 years before I get all my debts paid down, I'll be in a position maybe to start thinking about buying another camera. And then at that point, hopefully like the X-T2 will probably be like where the X-T1 is right now, like $350, $450, that type of thing. Then it'll be time to retool the system a little bit, maybe get some new stuff. But for right now, I'm, well, there's a lot of coulda, woulda, shoulda in there too, because you could have maybe, and some people were like, why didn't you get the Olympus, the whatever the flagship camera is, and I was like, I don't know. I like the GH5. I'm happy with the GH5. And I like the X-E3. I'm really happy with that too. I mean, it's so little. And frankly, I'm looking forward to having the Olympus camera out the door and kind of finishing that, because I'm looking forward to getting back to shooting with the X-E3, because I'm close to being finished with my reviews for the X-E3, and then it's like, okay, the review period is done, the honeymoon is over. Now we can get down to hashing out a budget and figuring out who takes out the garbage every Thursday, that type of thing in the old camera relationship there with the Fuji. And I'm really looking forward to that, because that is a phase that I have missed in all of my other cameras of recently, because it's been like, yeah, I get it for a little bit, and then I'm just like, I want to get this, I want to get that, I'll sell it and get something else. And now I'm kind of like, okay, I'm committing to the camera, and I'm going to settle down with it. And so I really want to see what happens kind of beyond the initial review phase, the breaking in phase, and kind of when you get down into that nitty gritty, trying to keep things interesting phase, see if there's enough meat on the bone there, which frankly I have no doubts that there will be plenty of meat on the bone there as far as the X-E3 is concerned. I'm going to have a lot of fun with that, and I'm looking forward to reviewing the pancake lenses, the 27 and the 18, which technically I know the 18 isn't a pancake, but it is a small lens, and so I'm going to lump it in there. And also the video, I want to do some video features and kind of look at that with the X-E3 as well. So let me see, I missed a couple other comments here. Andrew says there are some YouTube videos in which professional photographers given children's toy cameras are tasked with taking fashion shoots, street photography, and the results are spectacular. I have definitely seen a couple of those, and you're right, they are very inspiring and kind of put all of us in our gas to shame. Peter's weighing in about the, the camera doesn't matter, only the photographer. Peter Kent says, I believe that was true about that the camera doesn't matter. I believe that was true with film, but always with digital, but not always with digital. With the newest cameras, I think we're about as good as film now. I'm not sure if I misread that, but not always true with digital. Okay, I got it. What you're saying there. Peter thinks it's not always true with digital. That's what I meant to say. Um, Tiff said, I think I will rent the XT3 when it comes out. I would love to hear more about that. I'm curious as to how it is. And I think that because there's like there's an XT3 and then there's the XH1. So the XH1 is going to have the IBIS, and that's going to be like more video centric. And then the XT3 is like the upgraded XT2. But from a stills perspective, I can't really think of too much that I would want out of an XT3 that wasn't in the XT2 just for shooting stills. Like the XT2 was a amazing little camera, uh, but I would be really interested to hear what you think about it. Mario says one thing to consider also is using adapted lenses on smaller sensor isn't as good. Um, I'm not sure how do you mean that, Mario? Because I don't know. I mean, like, at least I've used adapted lenses for almost all my video work on the GH5, and I love the results I've gotten with that, and even with some of my older lenses too on like the GH5. I've been really happy with that. Now, so I guess your mileage may vary. Maybe you haven't had good luck with that, or if there's something that I don't know. But I've been happy. Maybe I'm blissfully ignorant or something. But I've been happy with the results I've gotten from my vintage glass on both the Fuji and the Olympus and the GH5, and of course GH5 is micro four thirds as well. One of the things that I did notice with the Olympus is that the focus peaking did not work with the vintage lenses, so that made it a little bit harder to shoot vintage on the Olympus, whereas like the XE3, the focus peaking will work even with the vintage lenses, and I'm not exactly sure why that is, but so that's a little bit of a downer, because I kind of wanted to shoot the vintage glass on the Olympus just to see how, and I did. I got some nice shots with that, but not as much as I would have liked if it had been as easy to use as the vintage glass on the XE3, because the vintage glass on the XE3, like I showed in my waterfall shooting video, the vintage glass in that is just like supremely easy to use and just fantastic. Really, really nice. So let's see. Are there any questions here that I missed? Okay. Yeah. So another thing. Last week, just on a personal level, last week I took my entrance exam to get into nursing school. So I still don't know whether I've gotten into the nursing program. I mean, I'm like in the school, like I'm taking my prerequisites, but I haven't actually been accepted into the nursing program. But I'm hoping that that's going to be a little bit of stress off of me, so that I can focus on, kind of doing a little bit more of my video work. But my hope is, I was freaking out before I took the test. I'm not used to like taking tests where I actually care about the results, like where I'm like really invested in it. But after all the work that I put in, and last semester, and kind of making this big transition, I really don't want to have to take any more time than I absolutely must to get this transition out of the way. And so I was freaking out the night before. I was texting my wife. I was like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna fail. I don't I studied all the wrong stuff. I'm not going to get into the nursing program, and blah blah blah. So, make a long story excruciating, I took the test. It was incredibly stressful. I hated my life like all that day. So I got an 87 on the exam, which is 97th percentile like nationwide. So apparently most people get like a 65, and I wound up surprising myself. I didn't do as good as I would have liked to do within the science portion of the exam, but I still did pretty well in that portion. And then math, surprisingly, I would have thought of all the things I would have done bad in. I got like a 96 in math, which I think they skewed the math a little bit on the easy side. But anyways, the hope is that, you know, my marks should be pretty good, that like I should be able to get into the nursing program, which may not be good for this channel because that would mean starting that in the fall. When I start the nursing program, I don't know how much time I'm going to be spending talking about cameras at that point. But the really cool thing is in my microbiology class. Okay, so microbiology is pretty sweet. If nothing else, just because I get to go and play with like $3,000 microscopes and look at bacteria under microscopes. And so like turns out that having done a lot with focusing has put me in a position of advantage in the class to be able to get get things in focus and to to work with that. So our first night of lab in micro was all about like, this is the the lenses and the objectives and all that stuff, like the lenses and the like the oh hell, I can't even remember what they're called now, but like yeah, it was like super fun to be able to play with that and to see like how big of a difference, like the depth of field is so razor thin that like you can look down into on a cellular level, you can see that depth of field change, just like from one part of a cell, from one layer of a cell, or like one side of the cell to the other as you adjust like the fine focus. And I'm gonna bring the X-E3 in there and see if I can find a way to kind of like couple it up to the microscope so that I can shoot. I posted a few things on my Instagram story last week about that I shot with the iPhone. It was really hard to get with the iPhone to get it steady enough to shoot a still image, because there was like staph and there was something else that I got in there in the that we were looking at. It was a prepared slide under the microscope, and it was really rad. I was pretty excited about that, so maybe I'll do some more photos of that. That could be kind of fun. But anyways, yeah. So let's see, where are we? Oh, the other thing, and I know you guys are. I'm not ignoring everybody here. I'm interested in if I missed anything. I guess I didn't miss too much. Tiff is just strategizing about buying the Fuji X-T3. Oh, 28 megapixel sensor. That's interesting on the X-T3. Although I don't know what's the point of the 28 versus 24? Like that'll be interesting. Water bears. What are water bears? Put an old camera sensor. Ooh, that's a good idea. I should do that. See if I can. That's a great idea. I'll have to look into that. I'm gonna see if that's feasible. That could be a lot of fun. One of the things I know that we've been talking about, or that I mentioned in one of my last videos, tardigrades, water bears. Interesting. I have not heard about that. Although I guess maybe I'll get into that with micro. A little bit, although I think since it's like medical microbiology, I don't know if that's gonna be the same sub genre of biology. But one of the things I've been talking about on some of my past live streams is about kind of wanting to do a different channel about outdoor stuff. And so I'm saving this intentionally to like minute number 83 in the live stream. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to make, I have another channel. And what I'm going to do is at some point, because this channel is like, got started from the idea of, my catchphrase at one point was just that I love being outside with the camera. And really there's two elements that one could focus on in that statement, which is, the outside or the camera. And I think what I want to do is I'm going to make one channel that's more for the outside stuff, and one that's, obviously this one that's more for the camera stuff, and kind of run them with a little bit of duality there so that I can, kind of have them play off of each other, I guess, a little bit, because I want to be able to make more outdoor focused content. that really doesn't, you know, relate directly to camera usage, but I also would like to be able to talk about cameras, and I'm not going to do that there when I'm doing outdoor stuff like fly tying and fly fishing and hiking and all of that stuff. So to be able to kind of have two channels that play off of each other a little bit, I think could be a nice thing. And that way, you know, I still have a place and a community to geek out about cameras and do photography and with everybody. You know, that I think that's going to be nice. And then also to be able to have a context to, you know, talk about other things too that are a big part of who I am, which is the outside part of things, not just the cameras. Because you know, honestly, I've been going a little bit stir crazy here that it's been so cold, and I haven't been able to go outside, haven't been able to really do nearly as much between work and school and all the rest of that. It's been challenging, and so like once the weather starts to warm up, I really want to get outside and just get after it. So some plans just to kind of keep you guys abreast of that. If anybody is interested in checking out or maybe subscribing to that other channel, it just has the picture right now. It's got like nothing else on it. The name of that channel is going to be Adventure RX. So that's something that you've seen that in the names of my videos. That was kind of the name of my vlog back in the day, and then I kind of bifurcated that and put that on its own channel. So that has 0 subscribers right now, but Adventure RX, like all, or Adventurer X, depending on how you how it's written or capitalized is what it's going to look like. But and I don't know exactly when I'm going to be adding content there and starting up. I definitely have loose ends to tie up here before I start doing any other type of vlogging. But that's something that's going to be, that's a project that's in the works. And what I'm probably going to do there is I'm probably going to batch shoot and edit, like, 20 videos or so before I start really publishing anything. And then like once I have it, I'm going to just like kind of roll everything out. Andrew, no, that probably isn't going to be the place where I would do landscape photography. If I do any of that, what I'll probably do is I will talk about the camera components and the photography components that I'm doing on this channel. Although I'll be dealing, in other words, I'll be going on shoots basically where I'm fishing or hiking or climbing, and I'm kind of unpacking that activity on the other channel that's the outdoor focused channel, but then unpacking the specific creative side behind that shoot that would happen on this channel, because this is still more the creative camera related side where I would do that. I've looked at some of the other channels, and I don't know. I'm not Thomas Heaton. Some of the things too with some of those channels, like it's a tremendous amount of effort, and I'm not really a landscape photographer. It's like. It's a crowd. There's some really good people out there doing some really good stuff. And so the only reason why I would do something like that is if it's something that I feel like I can add to. But basically what I want to do is like, I use the creative, I like to use YouTube as a place to build community around the things that I enjoy. Thank you, Peter. You are, at least to my knowledge, my first subscriber. And to get people excited about doing the thing that it is. And like on this channel, I feel like my main mission is to kind of get to people who are somewhere between where they're somewhere in a formative stage, and reach them with the idea that, hey, like you can take really great pictures without having to spend $1 billion on everything. And it's still fun to talk about spending $1 billion on camera equipment, but it probably isn't a great idea in reality. And kind of a less is more approach on some level. That's kind of what I like to do here, and I just started doing that really more so than anything because I just felt like I had something to say about the cameras that I was using. And from an outdoor perspective, I want to be able to make a channel that encourages people to take steps out of their comfort zone, to explore the outdoors, to connect with nature, and not to be like intimidated, because I know very well, like, it took me until I was in my mid-20s before I even really started climbing seriously, because I always felt like, oh, this is over my head, no pun intended. Like, I can't do this, I can't do that. Like, you have to be somebody special. There's secret handshake. And there's not, and I think it's an opportunity to reach people and encourage people to take an active role in their life, physically active role in their life, and go and do stuff and to explore the world a little bit, and to put some effort into things like being uncomfortable intentionally, and going outside and hiking and backpacking, and pushing themselves a little bit, even if it's only a little bit at a time. And that's always been the basis and the inspiration for my photography. I was a climber first. Like, I got into photography because I needed something to do, and my fingertips were shredded from climbing. And so eventually it was like, okay, well, I can't climb every day. So the days when I can't climb because I'm too fatigued, well, I'll go out with a camera and I'll see what I can do. And that turned into a whole complementary facet. Right, exactly. That's Peter. It's kind of behind the scenes type of thing. Although I don't know that it's going to be a direct one-to-one comparison, but like, I guess the way I would say is, like, let's say I'm going to go out, um, you know, if because not all the another part of the thing too is, like, even on this channel during the wintertime, I'm not out shooting a whole bunch. It's not like I can even go out and be like, okay, here's me going out shooting my daughter. It's like I can shoot a video where there's some of that stuff, but the amount of time that goes into the free time that you have to edit and to shoot something like that, where you're going out and really creating a complex, multi-layered vlog type story, is immense. Whereas doing something that is just a little bit more of a discussion with some illustrations, which is what most of my recent videos have been, somewhere between a camera review and a camera discussion, and just, that relate to specific cameras. That's something that I've been free to do on this channel, and I've really enjoyed doing. And I want to be able to have the freedom to do similar things with an outdoor context, like to be able to talk about fishing and talk about equipment, and so where it's not all just like, oh, we're going to go out and do this awesome day fishing. That would be a cool vlog, and I'll certainly be doing some of those, but some of it's going to be like, okay, let's just talk about fishing because I like talking about fishing. Or like, let's talk about fly tying, and like, let's tie some flies, and like, kind of dig into the stuff that we can do in the wintertime when the weather is crappy, or in our apartment in the city somewhere, where we can do these things that are all like part of getting excited and getting inspired to when the weather turns nice, and now we have like flies and information and knowledge we can put to use when we go out and explore and do different things, and like just kind of unpacking that whole thing from a lot of different angles. And I think there's going to be some more visually, so for example, when I'm going outside and I'm going on a fishing trip, there's going to be some of my day that is spent photographing and filming, and those days where there's more photographing and filming in an outdoor context where there's something to talk about from a creative standpoint, I guess I should say, those are the things that then I'm going to unpack that here, the photographic and video, a graphic, whatever, side of things. Then I'm going to have something to unpack here, but not all my videos are going to be that in depth necessarily. Some of them are going to just be a little bit more like, hey, let's talk about fishing or what have you. So, and I still have to figure it out exactly like how I want to angle everything on that channel. But it's been clear to me that this channel is much more creative focused, and I like that. But I also at the same time I miss having like an outdoor focused component to the things that I'm doing, because that's such a huge part of what I miss, and I'm starting to reconnect with that a little bit more so, because like, I had my time when I got burnt out on climbing and I got burnt out on traveling, and it was just like, I hate it, and I'm just going to sit inside and buy cameras on credit cards and be depressed and hate my life. And then I'm going to review those those cameras and hope that maybe I can make enough money on AdSense on YouTube to where I can pay for my poor, emotionally distraught camera buying purchases on YouTube, or with the YouTube reviews I can make up for that. And then, that's kind of like the life cycle of what things have been on this channel. But like, I'm starting to get to a point where I'm not burnt out on this stuff anymore. But like, being realistic, I don't know that I can go out and shoot like a weekly video even of, the fly fishing stuff or fly tying that it necessitates or that merits like its own standalone thing that's visually, I don't know that I'm going to be the Casey Neistat of fly fishing, excuse me, but um, but I'm excited about getting back into that stuff and reconnecting with it, because so where I am right now, I'm literally in the room where I grew up. I mean, this house is where I grew up as a kid. I'm back here for school, obviously, and like this is like when I was a little kid. When I was 10 years old. This desk, I had a fly tying vise that was on this desk. This was like, actually, funny story. This desk, my dad was refinishing this desk on the day that I was born, and my mom always, I don't know, she always mentioned that to me because like he was refinishing the desk and he just finished it when like her water broke and they had to take me to the hospital. But so I mean, there's a lot of like personal connection that I have to like fly tying, not specifically because of that desk, but like this is the place where I grew up, where I got involved with fly fishing like when I was a little kid. And I was a weird little kid. Like all I did was like ham radio, Morse code, and fly tying. Not, I wasn't playing Super Nintendo and like, jock athlete like all the rest of the kids that I was friends with. But it's cool to come back here as an adult now that I have a kid, and I'm like reconnecting with that past, and I'm going to be kind of getting back into fly tying, and going back out to these same streams where I haven't been for like 30 years, well, 25 years, let's say. It's been like 25 years since I've been to some of these bodies of water, and like kind of reconnecting with some of that. So I'm really legitimately excited, but I don't know if it would be fair to people who watch this channel to kind of try to bundle that all in, and more than that, even I think in my mind is what really makes the big difference. I could probably slice that phony baloney and cram it in the bag, but I think the way that I would rather do it is a way that makes it clear in my mind, so that when I'm on this channel I can be talking about cameras and be like, this is it. I will do lots of videos on fly tying. I love fly tying. I think it's super fun. I don't know that it would be super exciting from a video standpoint, but who knows? Maybe maybe that'll be like the new thing. It's really cool. It's very intricate, like as an art form. It's a lot of yeah. It is really interesting, and there's so much that you can learn because all of fly tying is based on bugs. So there are like actual bug patterns that you're trying to match and that you're trying to replicate, and depending on how, it's almost like origami and like paper folding stuff. It really is an art, yeah. You're replicating different features of different bugs and critters, and you're trying to do that in as authentic a way possible. And the idea is that you want to try to get, not always, it's not like a smaller is always better or more effective, but in a lot of cases, like the harder ones to tie are when you have like these tiny little bugs that are down on these like tiny little hooks that are almost, I don't want to say microscopic, but like that, like a size 20 or 22 or 28 hook is just incredibly tiny. It's so small. It's like the size of a gnat, like a tiny little gnat, literally. But then you're like taking feathers and all this stuff, and you're putting it all together and trying to match the colors and the body structures, so that there's definitely an entomological component to that that's really super interesting as well. And kind of learning how it all fits in with the rest of the ecosystem in the area that you are. For example, when there's certain types of mayflies that are that come out or that hatch for a couple of weeks when the forsythia bushes go into bloom, and then when they start to fade, then there's another type of fly that comes out, and that'll be for 2 weeks. So you can kind of gauge everything based on different ecological things that are happening, and you see how things work together, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I will make some gnats. I will do all of those things. I'm still getting ready to buy a fly tying kit. So the fly tying kit that I originally had when I was 12, I used it all the way through high school and college, and then I kind of stopped because I started climbing. And then in the course of my travels, when I was climbing, I made friends with a guy out in Utah who's like getting into fly tying. And he was like, "Oh man, I don't have enough money, like, to get a fly tying kit, but it always looked really awesome." And I was like, "Oh, I think I still have my fly tying stuff at my dad's house. Like, I'll just next time I'm out there, I'll just send it to you," because like I at that point I had no interest in fly tying anymore because I was a climber. Like, oh, climbing is way more cool. Like, who cares about fishing? So next time I came back to my dad's, I was just like, I boxed it all up, sent it out to him. He had a ball with it. He's still uses it, I believe. And so now, of course, I don't have any fly tying stuff anymore. So I'm gonna have to get myself situated there. But that'll be a nice part of the channel, is kind of going through the whole thing and saying, all right, this is what I need to get, and this is what I'm going to do with it, and all that, to kind of give everybody that perspective from the ground up. Tiff says it would be awesome to see you use macro lenses or newer or vintage lenses, and being creative in videoing something that something that you've created or that you really like. And yeah, macro lenses would definitely be part of that, because like you gotta do some. I'm thinking, because I've been thinking about ways that I could make it more, because like fly tying videos generally it's like one angle, there's a lens that's right up on the vise with the hook, and like everything is there, and you just kind of see the hands and you hear the voice, and that's all good, but it's like it's whatever, it is what it is. So anyways, guys, it is minute 100. It is almost 10 o'clock. I'm coming down with a cold, and I have to work my face off for the rest of the week. Schoolwork, hopefully get some videos in and stuff like that too. But anyways, I really enjoyed this live stream with you all, and I hope that we get to do more of this again soon. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, I'd love it if you did. If you want to check out the Adventure RX channel and subscribe there, I'll link it in the notes below if anybody is going to actually make it all the way through watching this, who isn't watching right now. Well, King Yuzi, you're already ahead, and staying up late watching this live stream instead of sleeping, you're getting further ahead probably with that cold, my friend. I hope you get some chicken soup, drink some electrolytes, get some hot liquids in you, and all of that. So, yeah, have a good week as well, Matt. Thanks for the camera, and I'm gonna be getting that video out here hopefully this week. I'm gonna get after it. Live streams, guys. Live streams. I'm gonna start doing them Sundays at this time instead of Fridays, because Fridays are always a little bit tricky. I don't have the time that I would like on Friday evenings with the family. It's just kind of too much juggling when I have to travel back and forth to see them, putting the little one to bed. And I mean, if I'm lucky, I get to see him, on the weekends. A lot of times it's like every other weekend, so I don't want to be, I don't want to half-ass the live stream, and I don't want to half-ass my time with the family. So Sunday nights are free. So that's what I'm going to do, move the live streams to Sunday nights. And it's very possible that I will, pop on for a live stream in the middle of the week as well if I have some time, So any chance of doing them a bit earlier? Yeah, I could do it. I could do a little bit earlier on Sundays. I mean, I would assume that everybody here would be okay with, well, I can't assume what everybody would be okay with, but I'm definitely thinking about doing them earlier. I mean, I could probably even do like an earlier in the day on Friday, because that's the thing about Fridays that makes them, yeah, everybody wants a different time. It's tricky. I got to think about that a little bit more, guys. I think those are good thoughts, good strands to keep in my head. Right now, let's just say Sundays at 8. If there's changes, I'll put it on my Instagram story, and I'll put it on my Twitter, because I usually go on there and kind of blast out a heads up. If you'd like an hour earlier, I could do 7. I could do 7 p.m. Eastern. That works for me if you guys want to do that. So let's just say 7. I'll do 7 p.m. Eastern, and that would actually be better for me because I get done at, closer to 9, 8:39 instead of like 10. So yeah, let's do that Sunday at 7. Okay, everybody good with that? Just 1 hour earlier on Sundays, and I'll we'll do that. And if I have a chance to jump on in the middle of the week or something like that, I'll do that as well. So, anyways, guys, thanks for checking out what we're doing, and subscribe to the Adventure RX. You'll be among the first to notice and to find out when I start testing the waters there with a slightly different theme in my channel. So, thanks for showing up, everybody. Appreciate it. Good night. We'll see you on the next episode, hopefully this week. Thanks, Peter. Take her easy. Good night, everybody.